morning, gamers. Welcome back to the Game Shop's Basement Game Master Academy with grumpy old GM John. Today, I might get a little grumpier than usual because we're going to continue our series on styles of RPG play with the Murder Hobos. We're really going to put the murder and murder hobos today. In putting this business together, I went through something that I hope none of you go through. I started this business during the COVID times, which it kind of reminds me of like in the original Star Wars movie when Obi-Wan Kenobi talks to young Luke Skywalker and talks about before the dark times, before the Empire. So yes, y'all might remember the COVID times and the havoc that it played with a lot of our lives. Well, during the COVID times, my job disappeared, and so I had to basically pay my bills with this gig immediately. Now, what most people do entrepreneurially, traditionally, is they start a side hustle. Their new business is a side hustle, and they are going to keep their day job, or they're going to keep their job and work a business on the side until the business gets to the point where they don't need the day job anymore. That's the more traditional thing to do. I went from complete unemployment because of the COVID times. And so the very first week that I was DMing professionally, I was buying groceries with the money that I got. And so in the beginning, I had to accept players that these days I would not accept. And I had to keep players at my table after they exhibited behaviors that these days I would not accept. These days I don't have to accept. But during the COVID times, I had to accept some players, and I found myself having to role play, as the DM doing NPCs, I had to role play NPC torture victims, I had to role play NPC rape victims, and I had to role play NPCs who had their homes and businesses burned down by arson, as player characters would watch from across the street and get off on the suffering they'd inflicted. I had to DM for some sick people, and it's nothing I would do now, and it's nothing I hope you ever have to do. But hopefully those of you who have talked to me about pro DMing, those of you who are my official Patreon students for pro DMing, you all have side hustles. You all are doing it the right way. It's not the COVID times right now, and none of you are unemployed, at least not to my knowledge that you've shared with me. And you are able to do this the right way. You're able to start pro GMing on the side as a side hustle, and y'all either still have your day jobs, or maybe a few of you are just retired and you're doing this for fun. But you're not depending on it right away to the point where you have to just accept any Joe Q gamer, Susie Q gamer that comes to your table. Well, it recently came to my attention that we are kind of famous here at Game Shop's Basement. One of our gaming sessions from the Christmas season of 2021 is actually on Crispy's Tavern as a supposed a D&D horror story. And since I was there and I was the DM, I can vouch, it was a horror story, but it was much more a horror story for me, the DM. And there were some important details that were kind of left out of the tale that I guess Crispy found on Reddit. So I'll put a link to it down below. But basically, the name of Crispy's story, and I'm milking this for all it's worth. I mean, they say there is no such thing as bad publicity. He's got tens of thousands of subscribers. So if this gets more people to check us out, more people to come over to our gaming tables, more people to help our community grow, then great. So let's get into this. So in December of 2021, I was running an event in Galantry in Mistara, and the name of Crispy's title for this is, was this the greatest railroad of all time? Well, it wasn't any kind of railroad, because the exact opposite of a railroad is a sandbox. So a railroad adventure, for those of you who aren't totally familiar with styles of how D&D adventures are written, a railroad adventure is an adventure that, it's kind of on rails like a roller coaster. It goes, to this part, then it goes to this part, then it goes to this part, and the players have very little agency to take the story in different directions. So I was running Sandbox, where there was no plot, there was no train tracks of any kind. It was completely the player's option whether they were going to participate in the event or not. And the event was the next day in universe, and the players decided that they wanted to kind of cheat, and that they wanted to go look at the competition field for the Great Galantrian Winter Olympic Snowball Games. And I didn't make them do that. There was no plot line for them to, no DM written plot line for them to go. They could have done anything that night in universe. They could have gone and partied or started a bar brawl or looked for a different plot hook somewhere else. Completely Sandbox, which is the total opposite of Railroad. And so apparently Crispy doesn't recognize the difference between Sandbox and Railroad, but never mind. Anyway, so the party weren't the only people that had the idea of cheating. So they ran into a group of kids out there that were already checking out they'd broken into the area of the snowball fields for the magical snowball fights for the Winter Olympics. Now, the Principalities of Galantry has child mages. In 1987, 10 years before Harry Potter and the Stone came out in 1997, TSR, the people who owned the Dungeons & Dragons brand at the time, they came out with the Principalities of Galantry and came out with a school of kid mages and actually came out with rules to play that. These days, WotC has Strixhaven, which is a school of young mages. And of course, everybody's familiar with Harry Potter, although that's not technically D&D. But, one of the things that people kind of dumped on in Crispy's story is, what were kids doing, throwing fireballs? Well, if you're familiar with the Principality of Galantry, that's a thing. And I actually have a link down below to Galantrian's child mages in our Obsidian Portal files. But the party, got ice stormed by the kids because the kids were all reckless and crazy and stupid. And in 40 years of game mastering, I've run encounters where the opponents, I'm not even necessarily going to say enemies because they're not always enemies, but the opponents need to be restrained. They need to be caught, captured. They don't need to be killed. And what this can do is this has the effect of forcing the players to not just fireball everything, not just magic missile everything, not just lightning bolt everything, because those kinds of attacks cannot be made non-lethal. I was in a jiu-jitsu class once where the teacher was talking about how jiu-jitsu and things like that and Aikido were superior to things like kickboxing and karate and stuff. And in his opinion, now I'm not saying I agree, I'm just kind of pointing out this point of view, but in his opinion, he said, if the drunk uncle gets crazy at Thanksgiving dinner, using jiu-jitsu and Aikido, you can put him in an arm bar and you can just kind of control him until he calms down. Whereas if all you know is how to punch and kick and break body parts, that doesn't give you a lot of options that, crazy uncle can walk away uninjured from. And so in D&D, when players have an opponent that they have to capture, catch, or restrain, that can force them to strategically kind of think outside the box. And the party had an NPC with them who suggested that they use things, crowd control type things like web and hold person, and the party had a wand of paralyzation, and there were all kinds of ways that they could have restrained or captured those kids. It's just that the combat would not have been so quick and bloody the way that group likes it, because that group likes to torture NPCs. They're one of the groups where I had to roleplay NPC torture victims a lot. But anyway, they decided, and I quote, "Those kids have to die." And so when the party closed in on the kids to do melee with them, the first person who had initiative, the first character, had a Vorpal sword. And I made sure as the DM to describe they're a bunch of kids, and he swung his sword anyway, a Vorpal sword, rolled a natural 20, beheaded that kid. And of course, as these adult adventurers started slaughtering, teenagers and preteens, the last half of the kids surrendered, and the party basically said too late and then slaughtered them in cold blood when the kids were trying to surrender. So this is the sickest, most disgusting game session that I've ever had to DM. And then, I needed the money though. And this was paying our bills. It was paying rent. It was paying groceries. I mean, the group broke up though because in the coming weeks they really resented and got on my case about running a realistic universe around them, a universe that would regard them as child murderers, a universe that had them on the run for being child murderers, a society that wanted to imprison them for being child murderers. And I'm kind of like, well, if you don't want to be treated like child murderers, then maybe you shouldn't be child murderers. But but yeah, it was my oldest friend in the world is a retired behavioral therapist, and when I was telling him about these people and some of the other people that I had to DM for like that back in the day, he said, "John, these people don't need D&D; they need therapy." And but anyway, I'll put a link down below to the Glantrian Child Mage thing. I'll put a link down below to the Crispies video where our community is represented incompletely, but I hope I've set the record straight here. And yeah, this is it's really important to screen your players if you can. Hopefully you're not desperate like I was, completely unemployed and having to take just anybody, because unfortunately our society has some sick people that should not be playing D&D. And this has been probably the most negative topic I've ever had to talk about, but tomorrow we'll move on to happier things. In the meantime, if you want to sign up for GM Academy, get personal coaching lessons from me and other grumpy old GMs who work with me, there's a link for that down below. If you'd like to get in on some of our games, and I can promise you we don't have players like that anymore at the table, okay? You won't have to put up with other players acting like that. There's links for that down below, and we will see you around the gaming table.